Well, guys, this was Vice President Harris's third trip to Arizona since taking office, and her last trip here was just several months ago. Now, today does mark the 2-year anniversary of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which is why she came back to Arizona today to mark that occasion and once again call for continued access to reproductive health care, including abortion and birth control. Now, sitting alongside her, actress Francia Raisa and Anna Tovar, who is a Democrat member of the Arizona Corporation Commission. They all spoke of the significance of the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, and said it created problems for women and families across the country, including here in Arizona, where abortion laws since the reversal have gone back to 15 weeks to then a near total abortion ban, and then once again back to 15 weeks with no exceptions for rape or incest. Now, Harris says Donald Trump hand-selected 3 Supreme Court justices who he knew would overturn Roe, so she says he is directly responsible.
Donald Trump says he is proudly responsible for what he's done. Proudly responsible that our daughter has fewer rights than my mother-in-law? Proudly responsible doctors can be imprisoned?
Harris also said that the reversal of Roe v. Wade threatens access to birth control and argues that it puts the protection of same-sex marriage into question as well. That's why today she is encouraging all Arizonans to vote for Democrats up and down the ballot this November. Now, we have been fact-checking all of the claims that Vice President Harris made today in her discussion, which is the same thing that we did when former President Donald Trump was in town just a few weeks ago. Now, we already have a lot of those claims up on our website, fact-checked for you to check out. I was able to take a look at some of those. We have verified some of them to be true. Some of them we have added more context, and then some we have not been able to verify so far. Once again, you can take a look at those at azfamily.com. Reporting live in Phoenix tonight, I'm Sarah Robinson for Arizona's Family.
Sarah, thanks for that.